All right, good evening, everybody. This is Tammy Lemmer, and I am calling to order the Monday, August 24th, 2020 Board of Education meeting for Hazlet Public Schools. If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. Secretary Wheeler, do we have correspondence to report this week?
Yes, we do have correspondence. Since our last board meeting, we received emails from first Brian Town. He is a former Hazlet teacher and current parent in the district. He had questions and points regarding online learning. We received correspondence from Jeff Ackerman and Todd Krajniak. Both emails were regarding data and guidelines for reopening schools safely. And we received emails from Kelly Upton and Rachel Pavlik regarding fall sports. And we received correspondence from Jason Kilday regarding data for opening schools safely.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll move into public comment now. And for anyone who may be new to the process, the public comment period is not a two-way dialogue between board members and members of the public. It is for members of the public to have an opportunity to speak and share comments. You may ask questions, and those questions could be addressed later in the evening, or they'll be forwarded on to the appropriate administrators for follow-up. Each individual is allowed up to 5 minutes each for your comments. And as noted in the agenda, this evening is a business meeting. It is not intended to be a public forum, but we do welcome comments and questions from the public during this portion of the agenda. So the way we've been managing, if you would like to speak for public comment, if you are on the Zoom platform, it looks like everybody is. We don't have anybody who's just calling in this evening. If you can use the hand raise feature, you get to that by, if you click on the participants icon, and it'll bring up the list of names, and at the bottom of that name, the list of names, pardon me, there's a raise hand button. And you can go ahead if anyone would like to speak this evening. Now would be the time to do so by using that raise hand feature. Call on you in the order of the names that I see. So I'll give folks just a second to find that feature and to raise their hands if anyone so desires. I'm not seeing anybody raising hands. Give it just another second or two. Not seeing any hands, so we will go ahead and close public comment. What I do want to do for the record that I should have probably done order is take attendance of our board members to confirm who is here. And looks like we have Trustee Michaud, Trustee here. Wheeler,
here.
Trustee East,
here.
Trustee Collins,
here.
I believe Trustee Polverento,
here,
and Trustee Maury,
here.
And I am Lemmer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have a full contingent of board members this evening. Thank you, everybody. So we'll go directly into the next portion of our agenda, which is the superintendent's report. Mr. Cook, if you would.
Thank you, President Lemmer. I just have a few things this evening. First and foremost, tomorrow is our annual welcome back staff meeting. Due to the restrictions, it's going to be quite a different format than in the past. We're just going to do a short welcome back first thing. President Lemmer is going to kick us off, and then I'm just going to give a short presentation to staff, introduce new staff, and kind of a lot of the same things that we've done in the past. So There is a link. Board members are invited to attend if they want to be a part of that. It's only going to be a short piece, as I mentioned. It'll probably only be about 15 minutes to half hour, depending upon how long we go. And then staff will go into their buildings to start doing unpacking. We've dedicated a full day for teachers to unpacking, and then they'll be doing professional development on Wednesday all day, getting their virtual classrooms ready for the start of school on August 31st. And then secondly, I'm pleased to announce the recommendation of hire for James Polisek for our Director of Special Education. Mr. Polisek has a BA in Biology from the University of Michigan, an MA in Learning Disabilities in Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Detroit, along with an MA in Leadership and Special Education from Grand Valley State University. Mr. Polisek was previously employed as an Assistant Special Ed Director, Compliance Officer for the Grand Rapids Public Schools, and is a Special Education Principal at Kent ISD. So we're very excited about him joining our staff, and that'll be a part of the recommendation later in the meeting. I believe he's here in the meeting, so I'll just wave to James. And then I have 3 personnel recommendations of hiring for teachers. Sarah Graymeyer is being recommended as a hire for a kindergarten teacher at Wilkshire. She has a BA in Education from Central Michigan University and an MA in Reading Intervention from Grand Canyon University, and she was previously employed by Waverly Community Schools. And then secondly, I'm recommending Alexandra Sanchez be hired for 3rd grade at Murphy Elementary School. She has a BA in Elementary Education and an MA in Education from Michigan State University, and she was previously employed by the Novi Community Schools. And then lastly, we're pleased to announce the return of Patrick Van Remmen, who was formerly a teacher at Raleigh 5th grade, and he is coming back after a 3-year absence. He has a BA in English from Michigan State University and an MA in Education from Aquinas College. So welcome back to Pat Van Remmen. And that's all I have, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. So we can then move into our discussion items for the evening. The first is status of our COVID-19 preparedness and response plan.
So part of the recommendation back on August 3rd was to just do a little short review report of where we're at in terms of our preparedness and response plan. So first of all, I thought I don't have a formal PowerPoint, but first of all, I thought I'd just review quickly of where we've been. As you recall, Mrs. Jones reported on our COVID preparedness plan at the last board meeting. It was approved by the board at August 10th. As you may recall, that particular plan laid out what our plan would be in the different phases according to the governor's response return to school plan, phase 1 through 3, phase 4, and phase 5. And we presented all of those pieces of our response plan to the board at their last meeting. It was uploaded to Michigan Department of Education in August by the ISD, and everything is now in place for that particular plan. So some of the things that we've done in the meantime is that we've come up with a response to return to school website. On our general website, we have a little place there where we're placing all of our information with regard to information about our learning plans, all the things that we're going to be doing over the next several weeks. We did have our parent forums last week, and I got a lot of positive feedback from those. Thanks to our building administrators for putting those on. All the PowerPoints are now posted on the website. We're in the process of getting the recordings up there. Unfortunately, Joe Dutcher was on vacation for a couple of days, so he's back and he is in the process of getting those uploaded to our YouTube channel. So there'll be a link available on that website so that you can get to there. So one of the things that we've been working on as a part of our plan that we shared with the board in the past is our daily schedules for each one of our instructional buildings, both Wilkshire, Murphy, Raleigh Middle School, and High School. And a part of putting those plans together was really establishing a plan that would work virtually and also a plan that would work when and if we were to come back in a hybrid mode. So all of our schedules had that in mind so that if we have to make the transition back to face-to-face learning, all our schedules were in place and that we wouldn't have a lot of difficulty in moving back to a hybrid schedule. So as you recall, all of those schedules included a full virtual 4-day-a-week synchronous learning plan, and then there was 1 day dedicated to fully asynchronous learning. So the elementary buildings, I believe that was on Friday, and the secondary buildings were on Wednesday. If and when we move to a hybrid plan, we would move the elementary buildings back to a Wednesday asynchronous learning piece because of deep cleaning. We would be doing cleaning on that Wednesday. So we would go to school Monday, Tuesday, have off on Wednesday. Half the people would come Monday, Tuesday. We'd have an asynchronous day on Wednesday, and then the other portion would come in on Thursday and Friday. So we've been spending a lot of time putting those together, thanks to our billing administrators and all those who are involved in putting those plans together. But we feel that we're in good shape, not only for our online plan to begin on Monday, but also when and if we have to move to a hybrid mode in terms of our learning plan. So that was one of our big pieces. So I just wanted to just make note that last weekend, the legislature passed 2 bills regarding education, and the governor signed it last Thursday. So now districts have to come up with what they call an extended continuity learning plan. And so that's separate from our preparedness and response plan. So here again, now we have to come up with another plan. Essentially, there's not been a lot of detail on that out there. There's about 7 or 8 components of that learning plan that we have to submit. The first thing that we're required to do is submit goals, and those are required by September 15th to the ISD, and then our full plan has to be submitted to the ISD by October 1st. So this is different than before. Like I said, we don't have the template, but there are several pieces in there that we're going to have to work on putting together. We're hoping that the state association, actually it's the Gellin Group, is going to be putting together a transparency or a, kind of a template for us to follow, similar to the template that we followed when we had to do the plan back in August and also back in March. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of putting that together. We'll probably be presenting at the next board meeting what that new plan looks like and what are all the requirements and all the components of that. In addition to that plan, there was also information with regard to pupil count, how we're going to handle that for next year. Also student attendance, days and hours, and benchmark assessments. So as a part of not only that plan, there was additional components of those bills that required us that basically gave us guidance on all of those particular things. So student attendance and pupil count are big ones. And so as we weren't certain that they were going to extend those waivers beyond September 30th, because that's currently where they were at. So at this point, it looks like that we're going to be able to have some form of online learning the rest of the year, and they're going to give us count for that particular requirement. So, and we'll be sharing more of what that looks like at an upcoming board meeting. So in terms of any questions so far, I don't want to move on without any questions from the board as where we're at so far. I'll open up for questions at the end too. So in terms of the decision to return back to school and the face-to-face instruction, one of the things that we talked about that we had to have a couple things in place. The first piece is making sure that all the safety protocol are in place at the buildings. And so as we outlined last meeting, we're currently in phase 4, and we went through all of those protocols that had to be in place in our buildings, on our buses, and all of our spaces with regard to safety protocols. So right now, staff is coming back tomorrow. We still have a few things that are needed to be completed in the buildings. And so once our buildings are ready to go, then we will be working on making sure all those safety protocols are in place. We know that what we have to do, so we have that plan in place. It's just some of the signage, some of the screening procedures, some of the things that are actually done in the buildings. We have to make sure that all those things are in place before we move forward. We are going to be starting transportation for our Wilson Town Center kids starting September 8th. We may be also providing some transportation to our MSU preschool students. So we will be getting a chance to practice some of those protocols in transportation with both the Wilson Talent Center students and also MSU preschool. In addition to that, we've talked as a part of our plan of bringing in smaller groups of students for both special needs and for at-risk. So we're putting those pieces together now so that when and if we get all our buildings ready to go, that we'll be able to hopefully bring some students back for in-person learning in the buildings, and then we can kind of do a dry run of those safety protocols for those students as they come back into our buildings for just a small amount of time in small group learning sessions for both special needs and for at-risk students. So that was the one component. In addition to that, we talked about developing metrics to analyze our health data moving forward. So we've been working with Ingham County Health Department. All the superintendents within the ISD have been working with the health department to get some guidance in that area. I shared with the board, I believe last week, the Ingham County Health Department now came out with their toolkit, which basically gives guidance on what we're supposed to do when and if we have any kind of cases of COVID in our buildings once we do open up, or if we have a staff member who potentially is exposed or test positive for COVID. So there's about an 11-page document that outlines all of the things that we have to do in response to all of those particular pieces. In addition, what I was, so Jason Mellema, who's the superintendent from the ISD, said that there's a new group of individuals who are working with local county officials to form a group called the School Transmission Triggers Workshop Group. And essentially it's made up of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, local health departments, and the University of Michigan, a whole bunch of health officials that will be putting out a document. It was supposed to come out today. It did not come out. I have not seen anything. I tried to get a hold of Jason to see if he's heard anything, but essentially the health department officials are trying to come up with some metrics in terms of helping districts determine when and if they can come back to face-to-face learnings, what are those data points have to be in order to do that. So my understanding is the big challenge right now is coming to consensus on those metrics and what those data points are. Unfortunately, we're not in the business of analyzing health data, so we do have to rely heavily on our local health officials to make those determinations. So we're very excited about having at least this one group help us in that assessment. We've also, as you know, we've met with our local doctors group that we had, that we met on a Zoom meeting at least one time. And we're going to try to bring those folks back together, at least to help do some education with our teachers when and if we have to go back to school, to be kind of an information platform for some of our employees as they may have questions about certain aspects of the COVID disease and some of the pieces that some of our staff may have some concerns about. So we've not got there yet with that group, but we are going to reach back out to them and see if we can get them involved once we get school started and we get teachers coming back in the buildings and so on and so forth. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We don't have that metrics data right now. We're just looking at what the Ingham County Health Department is putting out. The governor at any point could come out with changing our district or our region from being in phase 4 and phase 5 to phase 5. My understanding, at least from the data that I've seen, is that you know, we have pretty good numbers for this area, but that could change. Just all depends upon what happens over the next couple of weeks. So there are school districts that are going back in person, at least in a hybrid method in the area. So we'll keep an eye on what happens with those districts and essentially how they react or handle those particular, if they have any cases reported in those districts and how they handle that. So hopefully that'll help us as we potentially move towards face-to-face instruction. So that's kind of where we're at. It's a lot of information, but I did want to make sure that I at least brought you up to speed as to where we're at right now and what we're going to do moving forward. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I don't know, Ms. Jones, do you have any input with regard to our learning plans and where we're at with the virtual platform for our teachers?
No, I think we're in good shape with the PD that we've done and the PD that we have scheduled for the next couple we have in place. So I feel like teachers are getting everything where we need it to be, and I think we're good for now. We'll see.
So Steve and Susan, I know you've talked about understanding the health data and getting all the safety protocols in place, which I agree. We have to make sure we know where we're starting from and that we're ready to go. Have we talked at all about how we're going to evaluate how the online learning is working for our students, for parents, for teachers, just to be able to kind of do quality improvement on the fly in these first few weeks?
Mhm. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about if we do it in like a survey format or some kind of a, I think that's the easiest way to get information back is just to survey them. We haven't really talked about when that would happen, but I would say or we present to the board on, on our recommendation in October would be, we'd have something in place before that to get that feedback back. So, we'd also, I mean, if there's anything that comes in regards to communication from parents, we would actually, we would listen and reflect, use that as some of our feedback as well. But surveys are usually the easiest way to get that information back about how things are going.
Well, Susan, can we also take a look at any troubleshooting? I mean, there may be technology troubleshooting that teachers may be aware of, common questions they're getting from students, or students that aren't getting in, or they're not seeing them attending and reporting. All of that should also be just an indicator of how's it going.
We're going to ask teachers to keep careful track of the students as they, whether they're logging in or what, what their patterns are in that. And then if we have kids that are not logging in, we're definitely going to seek them out quickly so that we can make sure that, we keep a handle on that. But yeah, I mean, we will keep track of if there's like, especially the things I'm concerned about is like internet connectivity issues and whether or not we're being successful with that or not. We have the names of the families that we are going to give mobile hotspots to, but then we'll just kind of keep an eye on the other pieces to make sure that if it is a connectivity issue, we can get them maybe a different hotspot or something better to help them stay connected. So yeah, teachers will be keeping, kind of the logs of their part of the kind of the question. Where have you been? What seems to be the issue kind of thing.
So part of it.
Thanks, Karen. You were reading my mind there. I just wanted to add to that. I mean, today there was a huge Zoom blackout on the East Coast. I don't know if there was any direction from the ISD or the Department of Ed on if we lose a complete day like that, how does that count towards the requisite number of hours? And is it considered a snow day or what? I don't know.
So I will tell you, I was personally affected by that because I couldn't log on to Zoom today. I was panicking a little to try to get the meeting going tonight.
Yeah, so as a backup, I mean, we can always use Google Meet, which is another form of like Zoom. We're opting not to use that at the beginning because it doesn't have some of the safety features that we want and some of the more advanced features like breakout rooms and that kind of thing. So we're opting right now not to use Google Meet until those enhancements are available. But we do have that as a backup. If Zoom goes down, we could use Google Meet on just for a day or whatever. Yeah, I thought about that when the Zoom thing happened. I thought, ugh.
So part of the new legislation that was passed by the governor last Thursday has to do with student attendance, and part of that requires documentation of two-way interaction occurring between students. So we're currently working with our pupil accounting department at the ISD to determine exactly what that looks like. But as a part of our normal pupil count day that we do every October, we're going to have to also do periodic checks of two-way communication numbers for at least 75% of our students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what that looks like is that, so they count attendance as either like logging into a Zoom, and participating in the class that day live, or you can complete an assignment. There is another way to do it where you document whether they accessed the presentation and, worked on the assignment, but we would much rather do it through like a completed assignment as in just accessing, because you can't really assess what they learned just by accessing the video or whatever. So we, and those are the two more reliable ways to do it, is either if they log in or just complete it, because there will be kids that can't log in because of, parent work schedules or whatever, but there's a couple different ways to document that.
Yeah, my question kind of lied in that as well. So can we get a protocol in place that if there is any technical issue that's beyond our control, that the teachers are still, doing an asynchronous lesson so that we can, the students that we're supposed to be learning that day can catch up on it?
Yeah, and so we did write into our plan that if there was a situation where someone could not get any access at all, that we would do instructional packets and have them delivered to the home or whatever we need to do. That is in our plan. We're hoping that that's not the case because we want that face-to-face with kids and we want to be able to do those things with them. But or we can find other ways to get them access if we have to, potentially like bus them in and let them use our Wi-Fi in the building. We could do those types of things too.
Josh, were you thinking along the lines of so Zoom goes out, they can't broadcast, but maybe the teacher could still tape their instruction.
Yeah, we will always tape the instruction. Yeah.
Just making sure that that's still a piece of the puzzle there, that even if our communication platform goes down, that we're still recording the lesson. It's getting posted to either Seesaw or Google Class. The learning day can still continue. It may not be as ideal as we would like, but it still continues in a
No,
form.
we are always going to have teachers recording their lessons and uploading them for those that can't even view it just on a given day. But yes, and even on the asynchronous day, there will still be recorded lessons in there that students can view and participate in. So,
Steve, can I ask a health department question?
So, yeah.
You sent us the guidance from the health department. Is that up on our website? One of the biggest questions that parents have had is what happens if this happens and someone's exposed to COVID or test positive. And that really laid it out for me exactly what the protocol would be. And is there a way that we can share that with the parents?
Yeah, absolutely. I can have Jeff put that on our website.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I need to follow up with that because unfortunately, Tracy, I have a lot of concerns and a lot of questions about that document. I think there's multiple confusion points and fail points on how to interpret it. I'm just a stickler for exactness of language. It just comes from my professional work. So I won't go into all of them tonight, but I'll try to reach out to either Susan or Steve and talk with you about some of that. I was happy to learn that there is some folks out there trying to work on metrics for us, on statistical metrics that we can use to determine when it's appropriate to return to in-person. But there's another piece to that, and it's also simply what does COVID look like in our community? And clearly there are members of our community and people on our faculty and our staff who are deeply concerned about the health risks. And so I would really like to see some sort of reporting from the Ingham County Health Department next board meeting to talk with us about what COVID prevalence looks like in our community. There are statistics out there about community spread, but they tell slightly different stories if you know how to look at the different websites and find them. So I think it would be appropriate to have somebody come in and talk with us, just talk with our community a little bit about the numbers of cases, the kind of spread we've seen, our satisfaction with the level of testing that we've seen and the positivity rate and hospital capacity. All of those things will help draw a better picture of what things are looking like in our community so that we can put that in combination with whatever metrics we're handed to help people feel more comfortable or understand what our decision is at any given point in time, whether it's okay or whether to come back. Because we're at a point right now where MSU isn't going to let students live on the dorm, but I'm hearing there's a lot of pressure on for students to find off-campus housing and move back anyway, even if their dorm lease has been canceled. So we have not skated by a potential challenge from MSU students moving back onto campus yet.
Well, as far as I know, the emergency order from the health department for parts of East Lansing around gatherings over 25 is still in place, which gives some authority to the local law enforcement to to break up large gatherings. And I think some of that pressure, I would like to think some of that pressure would abate with what we're seeing up at Central right now and the rapidly increasing number of cases up on their campus. So I agree. It's going to be a big change in a lot of communities, depending on as college campuses and on small campuses.
I'm watching some of those college circumstances pretty closely myself.
I'm sure you are.
A couple of us are.
Yeah. Steve and Susan, I'm just wondering, I think the last time we had a board meeting, we were talking about still kind of figuring out what our creative arts was going to look like in an online environment and what those teachers were going to be doing. Any updates on, I know there's a new band parent meeting going on right now as they're trying to talk the 6th grade parents through what band's going to look like in this environment. Do we have any updates or any sense of maybe something that's not going to be offered, or are we still kind of going with a lot of the things we're able to do?
Yeah, so at the elementary level, most of the creative arts classes are going to be obviously asynchronous. They'll have a lesson that they can engage, and then we are going to utilize that staff for some of the intervention things that we want to put in place, and some other things that we want to work on with individual groups of students and stuff. So they'll be uploading lessons, but they won't be live lessons. We want to kind of limit the screen time for our younger kids, so but they will be things that they can do independently at home and show that they're learning some new things and doing some new things. The middle school and high school, the middle school, they're going to try to adapt the classes as much as possible to be able to do them in a synchronous, asynchronous format, just like a normal course in that building for rotations and stuff. Band and choir, I think they're just trying to figure out the best way possible to execute those classes in the virtual format, and doing some, I know the high school band is going to be doing some like after school small camp things and stuff to work on things that way, kind of like what they did with band camp this summer. And then at the high school, most of those classes are for credit. So again, finding ways to still have those courses in the online environment and make them, be able to cover the curriculum that they need to cover, but do it in the way, and if we have to give some supplies and things like that sent home, we'll make that work as we go through each of those courses, because they each pose their own sort of challenge. When we come back, it'll depend on, the things that, the phases that we're in and the cleaning protocols and that kind of thing. Some of the classes that I just think of right off the top of my head, like our robotics class, to use the robots would be challenging because of the cleaning between each class and that kind of thing. However, we've gone to the block schedule, so that'll help some. It'll be less cleaning and that kind of thing. There's also a coding side of that course that we can do, and there's a virtual kind of format online that we can use. So some of those classes can be adapted to different styles without having to maybe have contact with like the robots and things like that. But again, I think the instructors are working through each of those classes to make it work for what they need to do. It's got its own challenges, and I think when we come back in hybrid format, whenever that is, that's where we'll really try to figure out how challenging some of executing some. And I do think that doing the block schedules at the middle school and high school is going to help in that process, because again, like if you're trying to run a PE class, there's a lot of cleaning protocol that has to happen in between, and but they've come up with some good plans, and I think it'll be fine. So,
Well, I think band camp was evidence of, our ability to potentially do some in-person stuff and be successful doing it. So. Any other questions?
Any other questions? I think the questions I had have been addressed by other people's questions. So thank you to all the board members for being so active and engaged. I think then, are we ready to move on to discussion item number 2? We can only see a few people, but I'm not seeing or hearing any objections, so we will do that. So Vice President Polverento, we're going to move into a second reading of recommended new revised or rescinded board policies, and I do believe there were some questions. So if you want to officially do the second reading, then we can move into some questions that have arisen.
Absolutely. And for those who haven't joined us before, we do 2 readings of recommended policy changes that come from our consultations with Neola, which is a firm that kind of monitors education policy. So lets us know when we need to make changes to be in compliance with state and federal legislation, as well as recommendations that we sometimes get from the community. So the first policy change that's on here for a second reading is policy 2210, which is curriculum development. And we have 2 revisions on this, both of which which were recommended to the board by the Hazlitt Voices for Change, and meet some of their goals as far as addressing cultural awareness, cultural competence in our schools, as well as trying to improve our awareness and knowledge of diversity, and talking about things like unconscious bias and microaggressions. So the 2 recommended changes, one is that the board would direct that the curriculum of this district provide grade appropriate instruction on career development and respect for cultural differences. And it's the respect for cultural differences that is added. And it would also add language on a bullet about continuous and cumulative learning through effective articulation at all levels, particularly those skills identified as essential and life role skills. We would add including understanding unconscious bias and microaggressions as pivotal life skills. So those are the 2 changes recommended on that policy. The other changes, so for policy 2266, this would actually be a new policy, and it is related to the changes in Title IX regulations that were put forward by the U.S. Department of Education earlier this summer on non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities. This new policy would actually replace our former Title IX policy, which is policy 5517.02. And the reason that we're just doing a whole new policy is that Department of Education changed their language in the regulations so much that, quite honestly, it was just easier to adopt a new policy that incorporates those changes from the U.S. Department of Education instead of trying to edit the old policy. There were lots of changes in definitions, lots of changes in really what the process is for reporting an incident of sexual assault, sexual harassment. And so it's easier to adopt it as a new policy. We are recommending rescinding the old policy of 5517.02. These policies are available for review at the Hazlitt Administration Building if you're not able to come in person, given everything going on with COVID. I believe you can email the district, and copies of these can be sent to you electronically. So I don't know, Tammy, how you want to go next, but.
Sure. So since our first reading, there were some comments and questions that have come up. And Trustee East, did you want to share your comments about
Sure.
aligning the language with current MDE language that's in use?
Sure. And first I would simply want to say that my comments are with respect to the proposed changes to policy 2210, and I am fully supportive of making changes to this policy to reflect the changes that we would like to see our curriculum more inclusive of cultural diversity and more training, more acknowledgement, more education on microaggressions and bias. And my questions have arisen over just kind of the placement of the proposed language changes and the phrases used, to the extent they're different than some of the terms of art that are, used in fairly recent documents from MDE. So if the terms of arts that are being recommended, if the Hazlitt Voices for Change think that they are better than some of the terms of art used in MDE, then I'm perfectly fine with using some of those changes. But I'd just like to have conversation about the choice of some of the phrases that we're using. Because phrases like these need to have kind of a common understanding and a common meaning so that people can use and implement them appropriately with the results that people hope to get. And I'm also just concerned with the placement of some of the amendments because, for example, the cultural differences language is placed in a bullet that kind of stems from a fairly specific piece of legislation that only addressed career development. So I'm concerned about placing that amendment there because I think our goal is to really change curriculum so that our course content contains references. One of my most recent things that's come to my mind is when we teach World War II history, we could include a section on the Navajo code talkers, which is not there. So, I think we're looking to do more than perhaps the placement of some of this language suggests. So I would just like to have a little more conversation to make sure that what we're doing is really going to achieve the results that Hazlitt Voices for Change wants us to, and that we don't stumble or blunder because we got perhaps the wrong phrase in the wrong place. I want to do this really well.
So we have a couple of, well, Ed, does anyone have any questions or comments for Karen, first of all?
No, I support Karen's sentiments there. That's kind of the direction I was headed with all the questions that I had as well this week here, along with the process itself here. So well spoken, Karen. Thank you.
Well, and I just apologize for being a little slow on the uptake. I moved 3 sons to college in the last 10 days, so I've been a little distracted. But I spent some time diving in today, and I just want to do it really well.
Agreed.
And I will say, I apologize, I wasn't able to be at that larger meeting with Hazlitt Voices of Change where they met with the administrative team and some of the board members. So when I was sent the proposed language, my understanding was that at that meeting, there was general kind of agreement, at least behind the sentiment. And so we moved forward with that language proposed. But I think that your point, especially making sure that we are accurate, I just want to make sure that we're doing it in collaboration with Hazlitt Voices of Changes, Hazlitt Voices for Change, however we can do that, so that we don't take away from what their intention is.
So there's 2 options. We could, not make any proposed changes, leave the language as is, and then at our next meeting, we would decide, having had further conversation with community members and constituents, et cetera, truly is, what it needs to be to have the fullest effect, et cetera. Or we could propose some language today, which would then become a new first reading and would make the next meeting the second reading, and the meeting after that would be when we would potentially vote. Or we, I guess those are the 2 options. And it sounds like in the absence of having a conversation that we don't necessarily have the new language exactly the way we want it to make a quote unquote amendment for tonight. So that keeping the language as is for now might be the approach to take, but that we obligated to make a vote on it next time if we still haven't come to something that we all feel comfortable with.
Right.
That sounds correct, Tammy, and I'm happy to be part of further conversation with Hazlitt Voices for Change.
Okay, that sounds like probably the approach to take, and I'll reiterate or echo what you said, Karen, was that the sentiment, the intent, my understanding that we're in favor of. I mean, the board has not officially taken a vote, but in the various conversations that have occurred, there is support for changing the climate and making very tangible steps, including changes to curriculum that will move our district further along in its equity, diversity, and inclusion goals. But we as you said, want to do it the right way and make sure that the language is as clear as it needs to be. I would state that we're probably ahead of many districts in actually taking this very tangible step, and I'm proud of us for wanting to make this very tangible step. And so when we go back and look at that MDE language, we may decide it's not strong enough, and that we do want to go further ahead than what some of the sort of currently utilized language says. So I think, you know, as a board, we'll have to decide which way we want to go. So thank you for bringing those points up, Karen. And I think going forward, and especially at the next round of committee meetings, to have an actual amendment, if you will, or sort of some alternate language, as well as the alternative placement, as you mentioned. I understand where putting it under that career development, career and talent section, it makes sense because it can, you know, diversity and inclusion can and does impact your career development, your employability, your ability to engage and be active in a professional environment. But it may suit us better to separate it out and make it stand out and to make it even more effective. I think that's one of the issues that we want to address.
I just want to say too that the goal of this is not to, you know, try to cover everything that Hazlet Voices for Changes wanting to do, and we're hoping that through the diversity plan that the district is working on, that those goals kind of come together, and at, you know, in a few months as that work continues, we'll identify other policies where we need to make updates and changes and can work with them on some of that language as well. So this is really that first step.
Agreed. And it's an important first step because it goes to the core of what we are as an educational institution, which is curriculum and instruction. Were there any other questions, comments, or concerns about any of the proposed policy changes?
Well, before we leave this one, Tammy, I just wanted to, so what will our next step be? Are you going to try to reach out for Hazlet Voices for Change? Are we asking Steve or Susan to coordinate a meeting? What do we do next?
Yeah, that's a great question in terms of the logistics. I was thinking I would reach out because I have had some conversations with some of the group. But I think perhaps scheduling another meeting, again, you know, not whether it's at a committee meeting or whether it's another sort of ad hoc gathering where there's maybe 2 or 3 board members, so we're not hitting quorum, but we do have some representation. I think that's a potential next step as well, and maybe some cross between the finance and facility and policy and personnel, because it was all policy and personnel early on in the conversations.
Would you like us to forward any proposed revisions or changes to the subcommittee chairs?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay. In preparation for our next subcommittee meeting to discuss them?
Sure. Thank you, Greg. That's great. I guess I'm volunteering Karen and Molly to accept those comments, but yeah.
No,
but
that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. If you could copy me as well, though, Greg, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, great. And again, I want to reiterate the sounds like the full intention of the board is to move this concept forward, to stand behind important changes, and we just want to get the language right. So then I'm showing that those are our 2 discussion items for the evening, and we can go on to board reports. And I think policy and personnel had a meeting since our last full board. Yes, I know you did, as a matter of fact, because we have minutes that I've seen.
I want to make sure I don't forget anything. So, our first item of discussion when we met last Tuesday was around athletics, particularly high school athletics, and what MHSAA was doing at the time, or what decisions they hadn't made at the time, and the Director Ferguson around the status of different fall sports. And I believe that communication has since been sent out to the district. We also, of course, spent a lot of time talking about the back to school plans, where we were in the progress of the parent forums, the open houses, what supply distribution was going to look like. We also talked a little bit about, what we thought the implications were going to be of the legislation that at the time had passed the legislature but hadn't been signed yet from the governor, and really what that would mean for our timeline around potentially starting the hybrid model. We got updates on where we were with the bond and all the construction going on at our schools. We also had an update from Director Jensen as far as the budget and both what happened with the state funding for our fiscal year 20, which on June 30th, and then what funding we're anticipating for this next fiscal year, and kind of how that funding from the state related to COVID hit as far as the end of one fiscal year and the beginning of other, and what that means for our audit results when those come through. And then I also just gave a quick update on the timeline for our anticipated updates from Neola this fall. And I believe that's it.
Great, thank you very much. So finance and facilities update or report?
We also had a committee meeting with a similar agenda. We had extensive conversations with Athletic Director Ferguson about what was happening with the various fall sports, the high risk, the medium risk, and the lower risk sports. Excuse me. We also had a lot of conversation about the back to school update and the plans and the work on the bond related to opening the buildings for August 31st for staff and faculty to be in the buildings and in preparing for school, and also in the work that needs to be done, the analysis and the preparations for making a decision about whether or not we can return to in-person instruction. So we had lots of conversation about that and the different kind of decision points or analyses that we have to do to get to that point. And again, we also talked quite a bit about the budget update, that it is since the legislature has not enacted the budget for the 2021 school year yet. So we still don't know precisely what our foundation allowance is. So it was a meeting full of lots of heavy topics.
Thank you. So next is an update on Hazlet Voice for Change. So basically our diversity and equity planning efforts. Ms. Billings?
Yep, I just have a short update. We're still coordinating with Dr. Flanow about our plans for committee work and surveys and all of the things that I updated the board on at the last meeting, and trying to decide when we want to actually push those out. Things starting with school, we just want to make sure that our timing's right on that. So we're just kind of finalizing our plans for at least first semester stuff, and then we'll be able to push some of that information out, probably hopefully early September.
And can you remind me, because the Voices group had its own survey that we talked about, was primarily alumni that responded, and we talked about wanting to do that same survey with the current student body.
Yes.
That's separate and parallel to the sort of district-wide climate survey.
Correct. The one that we are sending out is more directed at parents and community, and then that one will be pushed out to students at all levels. And we did decide to wait and do that early in September because we knew all students would have access to their Chromebooks, so they could do it. And we wanted to make sure that we got the majority of our students to respond. So
great. And there were some possible tweaks going on to the parent-focused one, but the student survey could launch.
Correct. They'll probably launch at similar times, I would say.
Okay.
Just because, but we just want to wait, get school up and running, and then push those out, and then start working through the information. We did have John Yoon, who's one of our parents, that he actually worked with Dr. Flanow to look at the questions that we're asking, and they were tweaking a little bit of that just to make sure that we're asking the right questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions from anybody else? Sorry, I just jumped right in there. All right, items from board members.
I just want to say that I attended 2 parent forums this past week, one for the middle school and one for the high school. And I just want to say that our administrators did a fantastic job assuring as a parent, even though I sit here as a board member and hear all these plans, to actually see it and hear all of their answers to all of those questions and to see it all laid out. They did a very nice job. I only watched middle and high school, but I'm sure all of the buildings did a fantastic job.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? This is not for the record. We won't include it in the minutes, but I just wanted to beg everybody's indulgence. If you've seen me wiggling around, I'm dealing with some back issues, so sitting still is not in my best interest. I've been doing some wiggly wobbly stuff here. So thank you for your patience with that. Hearing or seeing anything else from board members, we can move to our consent agenda. There's a number of items on there this evening. I'll read through them. And as always, if anyone needs any of the individual items pulled for clarification or discussion, feel free to let me know. First consent agenda item, approval of minutes of our August 10th, 2020 regular school board meeting. Item number 2, approval of minutes from the August 17th Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Item number 3, approval of minutes from the August 18th Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. Item number 4, approval of the district course catalog. We made some changes at our last meeting, so those would be approved. Item number 5, approval of the Director of Special Education recommendation, approving the hiring of James Polisek as the Director of Special Education. And finally, item number 6, approval of personnel recommendations to approve the hiring of 3 new teachers effective August 25th. That would be Sarah Gravemeyer, Alexandra Sanchez, and Patrick Van Runnen. Does anyone need any of those items pulled? Not seeing or hearing anything. I'm seeing some nods or some shaking of heads. So I'll entertain a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda this evening.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Motion by East. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Was that Collins?
Collins.
Great, thank you. So we'll move into a vote. I will do a roll call just to make sure we catch everything. Sorry, I flipped to the wrong page. All right. Trustee Maury. Oops.
He's muted, Tammy. He has a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, for the record. Vice President Palvarento?
Yes.
Trustee Mashad?
Yes.
Secretary Wheeler?
Yes.
Treasurer East?
Yes.
And Trustee Collins?
Yes.
And President Lemmer, I vote aye as well. So the motion carries. We are now at announcements. The next Policy and Personnel Committee meeting will be held on September 3rd at 9 a.m. That meeting will be held remotely. A Finance and Facilities Committee meeting has been scheduled for the same day at 10:30 a.m. So Policy and Personnel is going to need to be efficient. And then we have our next regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on September 14th at 7 p.m. We're going to continue to hold those meetings remotely because we clearly have a lot of continuing public interest, and there's no way we can stay below the 10-person minimum or maximum rather for in-person gatherings. So announcements taken care of. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I'll
I
motion.
move we adjourn.
All right, I heard motion by Mashad and second by East.
Sure.
Terrific, thank you. So I'm going to go with Trustee Maury. Oops, I gotta look at him.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up again. Okay, thank you. Let the record reflect. Vice President Polverento,
Yes.
Trustee Collins,
Yes.
Treasurer East,
Yes.
Secretary Wheeler,
Yes.
Trustee Mashat,
Yes.
and Lemmer votes aye as well. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
luck.
Everybody.
Good night.
Back
Thank
to
you.
Ann.